Hello, everybody. Hello and welcome to the Embodiment Conference. This is it's Wednesday. That's all I can tell you. It is Wednesday.
It's hump day, they say.
It is hump day. It is hump day in the Embodiment Conference, but not a hump here because we have got the next hour with the lovely Robert Dilts. He's going to be talking to us about somatic modeling and accessing somatic intelligence in coaching. Robert is very accomplished. He's a developer, coach, trainer, and author of more than 25 books in the field of neurolinguistic programming and success factor modeling. He is the co-founder of NLP University and the International Association for Generative Change. Looking forward to hearing what he has to say. Robert, it is over to you.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you. And also thank you to the sponsors and to the founders of the Embodiment Conference. I was saying before we started how I think this is such an important thing to bring more and more into the world. And as we were saying, Liz, especially since we're doing more and more on this kind of virtual channel, we really need to make sure that our body is very involved. Also want to say thank you to Matthew Carew, who was the one who is kind of heading the coaching and therapy channel and was one who invited me and actually was very persistent to make sure that I came in. So I was very grateful to that and grateful to all of those of you who are taking the time to listen and to tune in today and to this particular program. I'm here in my place in Paris. It's a beautiful day here, so I'm looking forward to spending this next bit of time with you. What I plan to do is sort of set some framework about the whole notion of somatic modeling and somatic intelligence, and then obviously how we use that in coaching, kind of looking at this from both the NLP perspective, neuro-linguistic programming perspective, but also from the generative change perspective and the generative coaching perspective. So I want to set some frames, and then obviously we'll be doing some movement. I'll be taking you through some of the types of things that we do in generative change and in generative coaching. So again, I think the place I like to start is when I begin with a few slides just to set some background and framework, and then we'll go into some of the experiential part of this. So we already checked this out. These are all ready to go here. So this idea of somatic modeling and accessing somatic intelligence in coaching, and again, coming from both the NLP and the generative change perspective. I want to first say a little bit about the notion of what we call somatic syntax, which is something I co-developed with Judith Delosier, who has been also one of the other speakers early on with Charlie Badenhoff. Judy was a dancer and is a co-founder with me of the NLP University. And really, to me, is one of the people that brought, sort of the sort of whole nervous system from the neck down into NLP. NLP, for those of you who don't know, stands for neuro-linguistic programming. Neuro is about the whole nervous system in the body, and linguistic is about communication and language. Not only verbal language, but nonverbal language, language of the body. And then the idea of programming is how those things, fit together to determine how we act and what we do in the world. And so the idea of somatic syntax, it's a way of utilizing the mind-body connection. Obviously, the terms, somatic comes from Greek, meaning body, and syntax means, to order or arrangement of something. In our language, we use verbal syntax and grammar. So this idea of somatic syntax has to do with how the organization of our physiology and our body language influences us, influences how we think, how we act, what we do. It is, on the one hand, it's obviously an expression of the way that we think and the way that we are, but it also shapes the way that we think and shapes the way that we are. So the sort of the fundamental principle of the notion of somatic syntax is that there's information in the body, or we say knowledge in the muscle. I have a couple of quotes there, one from the great dancer Isadora Duncan, who said, you know, if I could say it, I wouldn't have to dance it. And so the implication there being that there are certain things that we cannot say in verbal language. Verbal language is an extremely limited, in many ways, channel of communication. So we need to use the body as a mode of communication. But also, it's not simply a mode of expression, it is also a mode of knowing. And this lovely proverb there that Judy loves to share from Papua New Guinea says, knowledge is only rumor until it is in the muscle. And I think this is true. We can, in my work with all types of people and all types of performance, going from leadership to, you know, to music, to dance, etc. You know, you could say, you know, leadership is a rumor till it's in the muscle, till it's in your body, until you are actually engaging and enacting it. And in the world of NLP, we like to talk about this relationship between deep structure and surface structure. So the deep structure is that knowledge, it's that information, the experiences, the thoughts, the meanings that are actually in our nervous system. And then the surface structures are the way in which we express that deep structure. And one of the principles of NLP is that any one of these surface structure expressions will have what's called either deletion, distortion, or generalization. What that means is that something of that deeper structure is going to get lost in translation, if you will. And so this is one of the reasons that it's so important in coaching, especially, to engage multiple intelligences, to engage multiple ways of representing things. So not only words, but movements and metaphors and images. And one of the keys to this notion of somatic syntax is that the body itself is actually a representational system. That means the body represents our inner thoughts. We can use it to represent things the same way that a book is a representation of, you know, thoughts, ideas, you know, processes, principles, and an image is a representation. We would say the body itself is a representational system. One of the big influences for me in terms of my own journey in embodiment was Moshe Feldenkrais, who was actually one of the people that was also modeled in the earlier days of NLP. The founders of NLP, Bandler and Grinder, Richard Bandler, John Grinder, started by modeling people like Virginia Satir, a family therapist, Fritz Perls of Gestalt therapy, Milton Erickson of hypnotherapy. But they also continued, and one of the people that they really spent a lot of time with was Moshe Feldenkrais. And I'm sure that there have been other, in this embodiment conference, there are Feldenkrais practitioners and teachers that are doing, sure, some really important presentations. I studied only a very little bit with Moshe himself. I had the really wonderful opportunity to study it for a long time with one of his students, Mia Siegel, one of his very first students. And so for me, this whole exploration of the body, again, as a representational system was really so important. And the quote I have here from Feldenkrais is something that he wrote many years ago, back in 1949, in one of his first books, Body and Mature Behavior, where he says, a recurrent emotional state always appears together with the attitude of the body and the vegetative state with which it was conditioned earlier. Therefore, when an individual emotional complex has been resolved, a specifically individual body habit is resolved simultaneously. So what Feldenkrais is clearly saying here is that, you know, body is a representational system for emotion in this particular case. And I think this is one of the key things that we're always looking for in coaching. How the body is representing, how the body is showing us and communicating to us what's going on. Now, again, emotions are one part of it, but in NLP, we also look at the body as a way as a way to both express and also influence our cognitive capabilities. In NLP, there's a whole area of study that's related to what we call accessing cues. And the idea of an accessing cue is that it's a way in which we use the body to help us to tune our sensory experience and our inner sensory representations. So where the eyes move is an accessing cue, but how we gesture is an accessing cue. So in addition to these deep structures being emotional, they also are cognitive. One of my favorite examples of this was some years ago, read this very interesting article in Natural History magazine about Darwin, that Darwin had what he called his thinking path. And this is a quote from this magazine saying that, you know, after he settled in its down house in the UK, he constructed a sand-covered path that he called the Sandwalk, and it's still there. And it's a, you know, nice little path, but he would walk on it daily, and not just to take a walk to go out and get exercise. It was actually one of his ways of being, you know, of processing and thinking. In fact, he called it his thinking path. And he would often, I thought it was interesting, he'd often pile a little group of stones at the head of this path, and each time he circled, he'd knock a stone away. And, you know, he called some of them a 3-stone problem or a 5-stone problem, depending upon how you know, how long it took him to sort something out. And as this says, it was sort of similar to, you know, the fictional Sherlock Holmes having a 2-pipe problem or a 3-pipe problem. And I just thought this was fascinating, this notion that we use the body as a way to support how we think. One of a really interesting example of this, I'll come back to the slides in just a moment, a really interesting example of this some years ago in my modeling of very high-level leaders, and looking at modeling a guy who started one of the largest shipping, you know, transportation companies in the world, a Norwegian guy, and his, you know, his boats and his shipping, you know, planes and boats would go all over the world. And, you know, he had oftentimes complex problems because there were cultural differences, there were political differences. And I remember asking him once, well, how do you deal with this complexity? How do you solve all these just big challenges? And I was kind of expecting him to, you know, share some kind of interesting, you know, thought process. But, you know, he said, well, do you really want to know? And I said, of course. And he said, well, I ride my bicycle. And I said, what? He said, yeah, I get on my bicycle and I start riding, you know, and after, you know, 20 minutes, you know, 40 minutes, half an hour, suddenly I have the answer, you know. And it was clearly what he was saying is, I'm using my body. I've got to engage my body or I will not be able to solve those complex problems. My little tiny left brain, linear logical left brain, is not good enough, doesn't have the intelligence to be able to solve those. That was interesting because a little bit later, he was talking about some other problem that he was dealing with in his company. And I said, oh, I guess you're going to have to ride your bicycle on that. And he goes, oh, no. You cannot ride your bicycle on that problem. That's a golf problem. You got to golf on that problem. That's a golfing problem. And I thought, wow, now that's interesting. He had a whole system of different types of movements that he would use to help him sort through these different problems. And it was always a kind of an interesting mystery to me until I started getting a little bit more of this, and I'll share in just a moment, by sort of deeper exploration of how our somatic syntax. Now notice that riding a bicycle is a different, we would say it's a different somatic syntax. It's much more fluid, right? It's round, you're pedaling, you're moving constantly. Golf is very different, right? Golf, you hit the ball, you walk, you stop, it's very punctuated. And so, and it's also contained within a course, whereas you can ride your bicycle all over the place. So it's very interesting. And I thought about this too, you know, with respect to somebody like, you know, Darwin. If you think about Darwin's whole idea of evolution, it's a slow incremental process, sort of like his walking. Now, people like Albert Einstein also used their body. Einstein, however, didn't walk. He didn't have a thinking path. He would go sailing. He would go out and sail. And they said, he was not a very good sailor, and said that sometimes see Einstein out there getting stuck and lost in his boat. But he would take his notebooks out and be, sailing and then scribbling down his notes. So now you can also get that sense that Einstein's way of thinking and his types of ideas were very different order than Darwin's ideas. So again, you get this notion that the body has an incredibly important influence on the way that we think. So I'll come back to my slides for a moment, and then I promise we'll be getting into some movement very soon. So, in fact, to me, the world of dance begins to also show us the value and the importance of somatic syntax and body as a representational system. This is a quote from Martha Graham, who I think is really capturing something even more now about this relationship between deep structure and surface structure. Because, Feldenkrais was talking about emotions. Darwin is talking about thoughts. Now, what Martha Graham says here, she was who's the founder, considered, the founder or one of the founders of modern expressive dance. My wife also studied with Martha Graham, studied the Martha Graham technique early on. And Martha Graham says, there's a vitality, a life force, a quickening, or you could say an energy that's translated through you into action. And because there's only one you in all time, this expression is unique. If you block it, it will never exist through any other medium and be lost. The world will not have it. And she says, it's not yours to determine how good it is, nor how it compares with other expressions. She says, it's your business to keep the channel open. Now, we keep that channel open through the body. And now what Martha Graham is saying is something even more profoundly here. It's not just an emotion that's coming through. It's not just a thought that's coming through. It's you that's coming through. It's your identity. It's your fundamental life force that is coming through. And so when we know ourselves, we expand and explore our identity through our quality of movement. There was a very interesting study that was mentioned in, I think it's Gay and Kathy Hendricks' book, about this group of people that sort of had this way of modeling movements. They had a whole calculus for being able to keep track of movements. They did the study of observing people through time and observing people at different ages. And they said, if you take a newborn who is, maybe a few months old, and you watch them for an hour, they said, you'll see something like 1,000 different movements in between how they're moving their head, their hands, their fingers, their body, 1,000 movements. If you took that same person when they're 10 years old and you watch them for an hour, you won't see 1,000 different movements anymore. You might see several hundred. They're still very active, but they won't have that same, variety of movements. If you take that same person when they're 30, you're going to be lucky to see 100 movements. And now what this is showing us, what it's saying is that through our lives, on the one hand, we might say, well, of course, we get more efficient. We get more efficient in using our body and using this instrument. But the flip side of that is we get more limited. And we start losing ways to express ourselves. So I think the big, really important thing of embodiment is to be able to use a range of different movements. And this is part of that idea of somatic syntax. I want to have a rich vocabulary. It would be like if I have a vocabulary of only 100 words, I cannot communicate very well. If I have a vocabulary of 500 words, I can communicate much more. And I think this is a big part of what this is saying. And also, to me, another big influence on my own journey with embodiment was Gabrielle Roth. My wife Deborah is a 5 rhythms teacher, and I know that there's other fantastic 5 rhythms teachers, I'm sure, on the dance track. And one of Gabrielle's great contributions was the notion of the 5 rhythms, and that rhythm being a classic example of what we mean by syntax. meaning it's not the content, it's not which part of the body it is. That's important. But the rhythm, I could have the same rhythm in my head, I have it in my hand, I can have it in my elbow, I can have it in my knee. So the rhythm is actually the syntax. It's almost the deeper expression of that deeper structure. And I'm not a 5 rhythms teacher, so I won't deign or pretend to teach it. But she says, flowing is the rhythm where you discover yourself. Staccato, where you've got these, very defined, discrete movements, is where you define yourself. Chaos, where you're, everything is, in going in different directions, helps you to dissolve yourself, and especially to dissolve those places where we're stuck and fixed and rigid. And then lyrical, after you've gone through the chaos, the lyrical is where you're free, and you're free, she says, to devote yourself into digging into that unique expression of your energy. What Martha Graham was saying, it's that life force. And then stillness allows you to disappear into the big energy that holds us all, so you can start the process again. It's where we connect to something bigger than ourselves. And obviously the whole notion of the 5 rhythms is, if you've ever danced it, I've done it now for 15 years, is, you're moving in a wave. And that wave, to me, is itself a description of a whole process of change. And very often, from a coaching perspective, I'm paying very close attention to which kind of rhythm is happening with the person. What's going on? Is somebody, any one of these rhythms has their positive benefit and their shadow. The shadow comes especially when we're not grounded in that rhythm. So flowing, if you just get flowing, you can kind of get stuck in whatever the inertia of an ongoing momentum, kind of a habit. I just keep going. Staccato obviously has to do with rigidity. It can also become aggression or violence. Chaos we often think of as having a sort of a negative connotation. It has a freeing potential, but it also has a disruptive potential. Lyrical, of course, has this expressive potential, but it can be superficial. Stillness, of course, is that very profound, brings us to a deep level of mindfulness, but it can also lead to a kind of a disassociation. So again, the interesting thing here is in this notion of a rhythm, and we think about that in coaching and a wave, we're often accompanying our client through a wave of change. And I'm often thinking, which is the rhythm that's most important for them now? Now, one of the interesting things, if we reflect on this, and here I'm going to bring in another one of my mentors, Gregory Bateson, who, by the way, interestingly enough, has an interesting connection with Gabrielle Roth, because they were both at the Esalen Institute at the same time in the 70s, when Gabrielle was developing the 5 rhythms. And Gregory used to go and dance with her as long as he could still move. And he's one of the people that told her, to get that out. In fact, he said to Gabrielle, he said, "You are obsessed with the pattern that connects." So I remember having a wonderful conversation about that with Gabrielle in New York some years ago. And now Bateson put him here for 2 reasons. One is, as we listen to some of these different uses of somatic syntax, we have Feldenkrais, who's talking about emotions coming through. But then, we have, Darwin, who's talking about thoughts coming through. Then we have Martha Graham, who's saying it's your identity that's coming through. And then you've got Gabrielle Roth, who's saying it's much more than that. Everything's coming through. So one of the models I use that was deeply inspired by Gregory Bateson is this notion of different levels. And so we use different levels as we engage these different parts of our experience. And our bodies and embodiment is so important for each level. And sort of the higher you go up this pyramid, the more you're going into the deep structure. And then the lower you come down, the more you're going into the surface structure, the expressive structure. So when I'm coaching, I'm having people use their body to express things like their purpose. What is your deep purpose here? To express their identity. Who are you? Show me with your body this role or this mission. To express values and beliefs, either limiting ones or empowering ones. to express different capabilities. And of course, the behavior itself is that expression in an environment. So for me, then, this idea of somatic syntax, we're using our body to get access to all of these different levels of who we are in the world. And again, as it says here, we're aligning these to have the most effective performance. So now, how do we use this in coaching? One of the ways that we use somatic modeling is very much, it's a really fundamental part of the generative coaching work that I do with Stephen Gilligan, who presented earlier and was co-founder with me of the International Association for Generative Change. And so what our premises are that, we have these filters, and our filters, basically translate the quantum world of possibilities, of all possibilities, into specific expressions. And again, that's that idea of potential in the deep structure to concrete expression in the surface structure. And we're always working in generative coaching with these three types of filters. The somatic filters, which we say is the somatic mind is the first mind. When we're born, we don't have a cognitive mind. We develop I'll express a little bit more, our field mind through time. But we do have our somatic intelligence, and then we add to that, as we learn, as we grow, a cognitive intelligence, and then this more relational intelligence, a field intelligence, we call it. And this idea that's very much also resonant with NLP, that all we know is what our filters produce. We say the map is not the territory, but all we have is our map. And now the key is, and this is so important in coaching, to be able to work generatively with those filters. So one of the first things I want to just be taking us through in just a moment is this idea that we can hold whatever is going on with our filters either in a state of mindlessness, or what we call neuromuscular lock, or we can hold it in a more generative state, a place of creative flow where solutions are possible. So one of the very first things, and our primary sort of focus in generative coaching, is what's the state of a person's filters when they're talking about a problem, when they're talking about a goal. This idea of this neuromuscular lock, we say these kind of survival strategies of fight, flight, freeze, fold. This is generally where problems and symptoms develop, where obstacles come up. When we take, and this is the interesting thing, when you take the same content, it can be the same thought, it can be the same parts of the body, but you hold them, you bring them into a different state of the filters, then suddenly resources and solutions are possible. And the basic distinction we make here is between what we call a crash state and a coach state. And crash is what Martha Graham would say, the channel is closed, it's degenerative. We're contracted, we're reactive, we're caught in analysis paralysis, we're separated, and there's a hostility, there's a hurting, there's a hating. Whereas if we can get that channel open, it's what we call a coach state. It's a generative state where you're centered in yourself, especially in the belly center, the physical center. You're open to possibilities. You're aware and attending to what's going on within you and around you. You're connected to yourself and to others and this bigger systems in which we're part. And we're able to hold what's happening from the state of hospitality, of resourcefulness, creativity, and curiosity. Now, my wife, Deborah, and I came up with these terms many years ago when we were in a crash state and we were needing to have a way that we could remember where we wanted to be, and when you're in a crash state, it's hard to remember anything. One of the things I learned very early on in NLP is that when somebody's in a crash state, no technique works. Right? If you're in a crash state, basically everything does not work. What you think makes no difference, what you say makes no difference, and what you do makes no difference. When you're in a generative state, when you're in a coach state, what you think is magic, what you say is magic, what you do is magic. And so the key, we're saying that fundamental key is, what is the state of those somatic filters? And this is, again, why this is such an important part of generative coaching. Now, I want to have us, so we've been going on for about 30 minutes, so I want to have us have our first experience, and now I'll add a little bit more, and we'll do another experience. But I'd like to have us all do a coach state. You can do it sitting if you need to. Otherwise, I encourage you to stand with me. There are different sort of ways of going to a coach state. You can go into a coach state very meditatively. But I like to do it through what we call active centering. And so very often, one of the first things that I'm doing with my clients and the groups that I'm working with is we're going to practice doing a what I call it in a sort of an active coach state. Now, the first part is you want to find that center. And a lot of times people, they say, well, I don't know, what do you mean by a center? How do I know if I'm centered? And why the belly center? Well, first of all, you know, the belly center is the actual physical center of the body. It's halfway between the top of the head and the bottom of the feet. And so it's there. It's also in anybody who's done any kind of athletics, performance type of art or sports, you know that the first thing you've got to learn to do is to center there. And that the more challenging whatever you're doing becomes, the more you've got to get down into that center. So a couple of ways to find that center. A simple way I often have people start with is you take your right leg and your right hand and you cross them over and, you know, come to the middle and find your balance. And then you go the other way, left leg over right, and find your balance. And just do that 3 times each way, kind of making sure each time in between you're finding your balance. So this is a way of finding that balance on the midline. Now, a little bit more active way to get into that center is to take your right elbow to your left knee and left elbow to the right knee. And the slower you do it, the more you're going to realize that movement can only happen around that belly center. That movement has got to happen around this center. So it's a way of bringing a little bit of energy, of connecting left to right, and kind of finding that place of the center. Now, then another way, if you really want to tell, so if a client really wants to know, gee, am I centered? Is I'll say, okay, balance on one leg. So you're going to balance on one leg. You can start this way. As you get more balanced, you want to bring the hands in closer together because it's easier to balance that way. And if you think you've really got a good balance, close your eyes. So when you close your eyes, you really have to come into the body. And then, again, do that with the other leg. Balance on the other leg. Lift the other leg. Center. And again, when you think you've got a good balance, close your eyes. So this is really going to mean that you've got to bring that attention inward. And again, you just do that 3 times for a few seconds on each foot. Now, I often like to tell people, try to do this down on one leg like that and then have an argument with somebody. Not going to work very well because as you stay centered in yourself, by the way, one little key here is if you're balancing on one leg, don't stiffen the other leg. If you stiffen it, you're going to have less balance, but actually soften that other knee so that you're going down. It's a lot easier. So soften. So that's part of centering. Now, if we want to start opening that channel, another simple thing to do is you can take your fingers, put them around your thumbs, put the hands down by your side, and you're going to do a movement, or if I can show you, you're going to sort of push down like you're pushing into the earth, bending your knees, and then you're going to open up and you go up on your toes, and so you're kind of connecting earth to the sky. And you do that again 3 times. Really feeling that vertical channel, the vertical axis opening. Because again, every performance art, I remember when I was learning tango with my wife, you have to start by being centered and then in your vertical axis. And then from that vertical axis and from that center, you can go anywhere. So now just the last little bit here from a coach state is what I like to call the coach state Tai Chi. And coach state Tai Chi is just a series of several movements that are associated with each part of that coach state. So the first is about centering. And so you bend your knees, put the hands down, center, and then open, especially sort of from the heart center out. And then alert and aware, especially from the head center out. And then we connect, especially we're connecting the head center to the heart center, to the belly center, to the body, to the earth. And this allows us to go to this place of holding whatever's happening from this place of resourcefulness, readiness, creativity. And again, I usually like to repeat that several times. And from a neuro-linguistic perspective, I'm often going to add words to it silently to myself. I'll say things like, I'm centered, or I'm centering. I'm open, or I'm opening. I'm alert, I'm awake. I'm aware. I'm connected. I'm here and ready. So just one more time, finding your own way, centering, opening, awakening, connecting, and holding. Now, when we begin a coaching session, this is always the first step of generative change. If you start from any other state, you're probably wasting your time and your client's time. Because again, you're going to be, we would say, swimming against the stream. So this is one of our first things, and there's many, many ways. I'm just showing you one way to do it that I think I like, because it involves us to be, being active, and I find that it really is a good way for me to, have a good sense. I see somebody put in a little question, sound, that you can obviously use sound too. There's what's your sound for centering? What's your sound for opening, for awakening? So you can actually use many other ways in our generative coaching training, which, by the way, is starting here in Paris tomorrow. It's the first of our 6 steps, and that is the foundation. Now, what do you do from there in coaching? In fact, I'm going to just go back briefly to my the slides before we do our next activity here. So once we're in that coach state, you think about, well, what is coaching? What do we do in coaching? So, the interesting thing about a coach, you see there's a little picture at the bottom of this slide of a coach, a literal coach. This is what the first meaning of coach was. It's a vehicle that takes you from some present state to some desired state. And for me, that's what the coaching process is about. I want to help somebody go from some present state, where are you now, to some desired state. It's different than therapy in the sense that in therapy, you're usually trying to get back from some sort of a problem state just to some kind of a stable state. You're trying to fix something that's broken in a way. In coaching, you're basically saying, I want to go somewhere. We say that, being a coach is a bit like being a taxi driver. What's the first thing the taxi driver asks you when you get in the taxi? So where do you want to go? If you say, I don't like it here, this is terrible, blah, 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 they're still going to say, that's too bad. So where do you want to go? And if you say, I just want to go somewhere nice, I want to go somewhere happy. Well, yes, but where exactly is that? So this whole notion that you've got to define a desired state. Now, sometimes you don't know the specifics of that. And this is what we would call in our generative change work an intention. That desired state is something I haven't created yet, so I don't know the details, but I know the direction that I want to go. And then I can, then I have to make the path there, and I need resources and tools to create that path. And along the way, I'm going to meet obstacles and interferences. Now, in generative coaching work, we're going to use somatic modeling for every single part of that process. We're going to say, show me with your body, what's your present state? where are you now? Just show, if you would have had to, if you couldn't speak and you had to show me with your body, how would you show that? You know, is it like this? Is it like this? And we'll say, okay, show me with your body. What is it that you want? What is that desired state? In our generative change work, usually one of our first questions after coach state is we say, what is it that you most want to create in your life? What is it you want to create now in your life? And it could be with respect to your health. It could be with respect to your business, with respect to your relationships. You know, what is it you want to create? And then usually, of course, people start with words and then we'll say, yeah, well, now show me with your body. What does that look like? What is that desired state going to look like in your body? Now then, along the way, you've got to find resources. And this is where we call that. Now, the coach in this case is not actually the person that's the coach. The coach is the vehicle that is created by the relationship between the coach and the client. So you have the coach and the client, and we say that there's a generative relationship there. And when we are both in a coach state, we can hold whatever is coming up with respect to that change process that's happening, especially the obstacles and interferences. And a big part of what we do in generative change is we want to welcome those obstacles and interferences, not try to ignore them, deny them, get rid of them. We actually want to welcome them and transform them. And that is something that absolutely requires the body. So again, in the generative coaching work and in, I think, coaching work in general, you want to use the body as your primary way to represent each and every part of this diagram here. Where are you trying to get to? Where are you now? Okay, what's the path? What resource do I need to get there? What's the obstacle? What resource am I going to have that's going to help me with that obstacle? And you create what we like to call in generative coaching a storyboard. A storyboard comes from the Walt Disney. He's the inventor of storyboard, and we move through these three stages of dreamer, realist, and critic to create that path. Now, there's another way to do that. We put it on a timeline, and just want to show my colleague Judy Delosier, many years ago, developed this brilliant process that we call the dancing score, S-C-O-R-E. Symptom and cause are what they make up the present state. I have a symptom, and the cause of that symptom is my present state. The O and the E are the outcome and the effect. That's the desired state. What do I want, and why do I want that? What's the longer term effect? And the R is the resources. And you can see here that there's a storyboard happening there that you can tell, and you can create each part of this path from that present state to the desired state through the body. And that's actually where I would like to have us go next, just to do a little brief taste of this. I'm going to invite us all to stand up again. And just as a way to begin to make a kind of a storyboard. So you're going to need a little bit of a timeline. Now you can do it coming towards the computer. I'm going to do it going this way so you can see it a little bit more easily. Because we're going to say if this is the present, and I'm going to be going into the future. So very often when we're doing a generative coaching session, or an NLP session, any kind of a coaching session, we're going to have a physical timeline. We say, you know, behind me is my past, in front of me is my future. Now, as a coach, what I want to do is to help my client go from their current state, their present state, to their desired state. Now, this may mean that I have to actually address some things from their past. And so we're going to be actually using this timeline, and then we're going to be creating the storyboard, not only with words and images, but also with somatic models of each step. So if you would join me here, let's start again in a coach state. And you might remember some of those things that we were doing before, how you might sort of first center yourself. You can do this actually fairly quickly. I'm often doing it just to sort of warm up. Get these, get my balance, find that center, lower that center. Again, just kind of 3 times on each foot for a little bit. So coach state. And then maybe opening that channel, really feeling that Martha Graham says you are a channel. When that channel is open, your life force can come through. It could flow through, as Gabrielle would say. You can discover yourself through that flow when that channel is open. And then maybe that little bit of Coach State Tai Chi, centering, opening, awakening, connecting, holding. And just a couple more times, just like you would a Tai Chi movement. Slowly, mindfully, letting the body guide you into this place of the generative, resourceful, channel open. And then, because we said, the first question of a coach is like the first question of the taxi driver, where do you want to go? And so I'm going to just invite you to think about for the next, we'll just do a couple of steps here. What would you most like to create? As you think about why you're here, why you joined this embodiment conference, what is it that you want to create more of in your life? What is it that you would like to have more of? If you could generatively live, if you were able to generatively live more from this place with the channel open, what would you like more of? It could be in your health or with your body, could be with your business, could be with in your relationship. In this time, of course, of COVID, we've got all kinds of challenges. So I'm going to just ask you now to step into the future. Let's take 2 steps into the future. 1, 2. And really sort of put yourself there. And then as you think about that desired state, well, what do I want? Let your body show you. What do I want more of? What do I want to create more of? And now the idea of the somatic syntax is it's not just a fixed, rigid posture. It's actually a movement, like a dance, right? It's a movement. Which parts of your body move? And again, in Gabrielle Roth's map, which rhythm seems to be most calling you here? Sometimes for people, they have a much more staccato rhythm. I want this. And for some people, it's more flowing. For some people, it's more lyrical. Some people, it's more still. So just kind of explore that. And now you don't have to know all the details of it, but this is a way, this is just as powerful a way as if you used a whole bunch of words to describe it. So your body can show you. Now, we then are going to take 2 steps back and come to the present state. Say, that's where I want to go. Where am I now? So what is it? Where am I now? And oftentimes you're going to find that, okay, we like to say in our generative change work, we say, yeah, I want that, but something else is happening instead. I'd like to be more trusting and confident, but I find that I get into this place of doubt or this place of analysis paralysis. So kind of find that. So I really want this desired state, but what seems to be happening and what seems to be getting in your way in the present state? And just sort of find that. And what would be your way of showing that with your own body? What is it that's happening now? Maybe because of COVID, there's a lot of confusion. That would be sort of the chaos. Maybe I'm too rigid. What is it? Maybe something's holding me back. So just find that, explore that a little bit with your body. Now, the last thing, and then we're going to take a few questions, is if you were to look for the resource, what resource can help me to, and like in Judy's idea of that dancing score, what resource, if I brought it to this present state, could help me to transform that? Now, there are different places that you can find that resource, but I sometimes like to find it, if I was to take a step in the middle between the present state and the desired state, and really say, what is it that allows me to move towards that desired state? I don't have to know it consciously or cognitively. I can start to let my body show me. And I can use, this is the wonderful thing about your body and this idea of a representational system. And what Steve Gilligan and I talk about, I can reach out into a whole vast field of resources Right now, as I'm looking out my windows, I can see clouds. Well, maybe clouds are a resource that can help me if I can dance those clouds. Maybe there's the wind. Maybe there's a mountain. So just find what that is for you, what that resource would be. And then we're going to take that into the present state, connect it to your present state, and you're going to dance between them. So if I turn that into a dance, my present state, my resource, my present state, my resource, my desired state. And here's where you're really starting to do the somatic syntax. And the idea of really taking that and making a dance out of it. They're not separate, rigid things. I can integrate them together. And that's the beauty of this idea of a storyboard, a dancing score. Now, obviously, we have a short time, and I'm just kind of showing you the basics of this. But this would be something that we would work with time and again in a coaching process. So often, you know, even if I'm just talking with somebody and they suddenly start going into one of these crash states, I'll say, let's pause, show me with your body what's happening. You know, what's your desired state? Show me what you want. And it's just very often this is a key to a big breakthrough. As Albert Einstein pointed out a long time ago, you can't solve a problem with the same thinking that's creating the problem. And usually our head gets us into these problems that no matter how much more you use your head, you're not going to solve it with the head. You've got to move to other intelligences. I'm aware I was hoping to have a little time for a question. I know this, though we're pretty much at our ending. I don't know if there is any time for that, Liz. I'm going to pass it back to you, and you take it from here.
Well, Robert, this has been really fascinating and so clearly and articulately put. So thank you so much. Really, really wonderful. Really wonderful. Lots of positivity coming through into the chat there for you. And yeah, really succinct and delightful. We have one question in the Q&A that's been upvoted around, a few coming in now. Fight, flight and freeze are well known. Could you briefly mention what fold is? Yeah.
So fold is like when you give up, right? So if I fight, you know, I'm active. If I run away, I'm active. If I freeze, I'm rigid. But fold means I fall down, right? It is a survival strategy, right? It's what some animals do, right? It's what a possum does. It's not fighting. It's not running away. It's not frozen. It's like it's dead, you know. So it is a survival strategy, but it's sort of like when people just give up. And that's what folding would be, you know, like you fold down.
Great, thank you. That's great, clear. Question from Caitlin here. What if someone has never moved their body like this before? How successful can it be at first?
Fantastic question. So now some people, first of all, you know, have limitations to move their bodies, right? They can't move it. This is what the whole idea of the somatic syntax comes in. And it's first thing I learned it first from Feldenkrais, also learned it in the 5 rhythms. If, let's say, I cannot move my body, I do show you with my hand. Okay, you can't show me with your arms, show me with your hand what that would be like. Okay, show me just with your legs. So if they're either self-conscious or there's pain, it's not necessary, because this is the interesting thing about syntax. It's not about that you have to move that specific part of your body only. It's the syntax. The metaphor sometimes I use is, you know, I can write the letter A with my right hand. I learned to write it with my right hand, but I can also write the letter A with my left elbow. Now, nobody taught my left elbow how to write, but I could do it immediately. I could put a pen in my mouth. I can write the letter A with my neck. So it's the organization of the movement that is the most important here. So this is what I would do. Is, you know, if somebody's uncomfortable or it's difficult, start small. Great.
And a very last question, because we really are out of time, and it's so rich and so full. From George, is a macro practice, such as different activities, or a micro practice, such as defining the activity, more efficient to develop a somatic model of practice?
Well, that's a great question. Unfortunately, the answer is it depends, because, I mean, it depends. It sometimes for me, I will have people, like I'm thinking macro activity would be something like we were talking about riding a bike, golfing, or something like that. And that is, those are practices that would be good. My daily practice is in fact running. I've been running Actually, during the last 8 months, I've been running pretty much 90 minutes a day. That's a macro practice. But then micro practices are, again, using and articulating very specific parts of the body and for specific types of micro rhythms, let's say. So the answer is, it really kind of depends on what's the resource that you need and what's the situation that you're dealing with.
Great, fantastic stuff, Robert. Really, really interesting. And I'm afraid we haven't got time for any more of the questions here, but they can find you in the real world, can't they? Yeah, so we'll pop your website in the chat.
Yes. It's just robertdilts.com. It's easy enough to remember.
We have diltsstrategygroup.com.
Yeah, it can be diltsstrategygroup.com is another one, and robertdilts.com is another one. So
robertdilts.com. So if you do have more questions for Robert, I'm sure you can reach out to him on his website, because yeah, a very, very rich session. And if you want to talk about it more, that we have the coffee break rooms, the Zoom rooms that you can go to in the portal. You can connect with other participants if you want to talk about what you've been learning, or even try some of these techniques out. I really love this differentiation between the crash state and the coach state. So articulately put and easy to feel as well. Yes, so yeah,
exactly.
That's
and it gets, the interesting thing is it can be very subtle, right? You know, just a little fur in the brow, a little, you know, a tightening of the breath can be crash. It doesn't have to always be so obvious. So this is where the subtlety comes in, especially in coaching.
Fantastic. Well, you can, of course, stay connected with us on our Facebook group, the Embodiment Conference group, and so do check us out there and become part of this huge global community if you're not there already. Thanks again to our channel sponsor, which was Uzazu and Dylan Newcomb and his work. And of course, thanks, to Robert Dilts, who has been our presenter today. If you have enjoyed this, you can watch it again for the next 48 hours over and over again. Or you can watch any of the other many wonderful talks across all the different channels at the conference. They're all free for 48 hours. If, like me, you're overwhelmed with the amazing breadth of knowledge that we have here at the conference and you'd like a bit more time to digest things, then you can upgrade the package. That is 50% off for the duration of the conference, and you'll also get some learning notes and audio files of those talks, so you can listen to them while you are moving, which is great. Very good indeed. So that is all from us, but I'm going to pop back to you, Robert, for our very final tip, because we have you here. What would you say is your top tip to be more embodied?
Well, I always like to say, and it comes down to, I'm sure what many of those would say, is practice. It's, we become what we practice. We are what we practice. And so having some type of daily practice is so important. Something that brings you into your body and through your body. That's why I say I run every day. And if I can't run, I'm going to do something. I'll do something that it just is my way of honoring my body and bringing my body online for the day.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Robert. It's been an absolute pleasure. Next up on the coaching channel at 4 p.m, we have Liz Doyle-Harmer with Embodied Confidence for Women. This has been Robert Dilts. Thank you ever so much. Bye-bye.
For now. Bye-bye.